Hey guys, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Black Lightning Season 3 review series. And today I'm going to be talking about Episode 6, The Book of Resistance, Chapter 1, Knocking on Heaven's Door. And this episode pretty much picks up where we left off at the end of Episode 5, which was called The Book of Occupation, Chapter 5, Requiem for Tavon. And basically, this episode deals with the aftermath of Tavon being murdered at the hands of Painkiller. We saw that Tavon was poisoned with venom and he succumbed to the effects of that. And we saw Jefferson Pierce get beaten up. And we also saw at the end of episode 5, we saw Henderson and a group of others, along with Blackbird, come together and basically want to take down the ASA once and for all. So that was a really good way to end the story arc of Chapter 5 of the Book of Occupation, but also in a way it helps kick off things in a big way in this little story arc called the Book of Resistance. Now, as I said in the previous video, what I like about Black Lightning is they have little story arcs, and they have about 4, maybe 5 chapters, but all of the little story arcs make up the whole season of one big story arc. So it's really cool that they do that, and as I said in the last video, that's something I would definitely like to see the other shows in the Arrowverse take inspiration from and add it to their own shows, because as I said in the last video, it does get a little bit confusing when they wrap up one story arc and they go straight into another and you don't realise where you're at. But with Black Lightning, it's still continuing, it's still going forward, but it's a whole new story arc. But it doesn't feel new, but it's still carrying on from the last one, but still going forward. So I really enjoy those aspects of the show. So with that all said, let's get right into it. Let's talk about Episode 6, The Book of Resistance, Chapter 1, Knocking on Heaven's Door. So we open up this episode when we see Anissa is filming what could be a final message to her family, as she is still continuing to struggle with Painkiller's toxin in her system, claiming that even if she dies, it will have all been worth it because she stood up for what she believed in and what she was fighting for. Now, in the last episode, we saw Anissa in her Blackbird persona take on the Painkiller and she was poisoned. So this is kind of continuing on from that. Also, we see 30 hours earlier, we see at the church, it's Tavon's funeral with the Pierce family in attendance, and Lynn is proud that Jefferson didn't suit up to avenge him, upsetting both Jefferson and Anissa in the process. Jamila then shows up and disrespectfully attempts to interview Jefferson at the service. He chooses to answer one question, what he'd say to Tavon. He tells him that he's proud of him and that his death will not be in vain. So obviously, going by those lines, Jefferson is looking to avenge Tavon as Black Lightning. More on that momentarily. So the next day we see Lynn confronts Jefferson about some of his activities as Black Lightning, and they fight as they fundamentally disagree about how to handle not only Agent Odell but his role as Black Lightning. Elsewhere we see Gamby is working on Anissa's injury, and while she's not handling Tavon's death very well, Gamby's news is even more bleak. It turns out the poison would have killed her already if she wasn't a metahuman, but now it's suppressing her metagene entirely. We see Gamby is working on an anti-venom serum, and there may not be enough time to give it to her. We then see Henderson meets with the Resistance and complains about the ASA's fake news campaign twisting the truth about them, and Truth Teller has been killed, so they need to go wider with their message. The plan is now to broadcast to all of Freeland, and Henderson now has to find a new voice for the movement. Meanwhile, at the ASA, we see Tobias is now fully restored, and he tries to convince Lynn that he's now a true friend, who would cross her to her face rather than Odell, who would just use her. He also knows about Black Lightning's latest escapades, Lynn asks what does he want, and he says, I want a list of all of the metahumans and what their abilities are. So now we've got at least a rough idea of what Tobias's agenda is. Meanwhile, we see Anissa continues to be weakened by the effects of the venom, and Jefferson pays her a visit to check in on her health, and as well as apologising for pressuring her to bring Tavon back to Freeland. We see Jefferson blames himself for Tavon's death, though Anissa argues it is still on her for going ahead and doing it anyway. She makes Jefferson leave, and then she collapses. Anissa wakes up with Grace taking care of her, having found her on the floor unconscious. Anissa plays things off, but Grace tells her that Anissa smells of death. Nice. Anissa continues to play things off, but the poison is spreading fast. Elsewhere we see Jennifer breaks into Brandon's apartment and finds plants, a lab, a bunch of other things, and discovers he's got a bunch of research on her mother on his computer. We then see the two of them go at it. Adele pays Jefferson a visit and says he has a team of neurologists ready to give him an examination, threatening consequences of breaking their deal. Jefferson says the deal is off and threatens him. Meanwhile, we see presumably some ASA soldiers are in a transport truck when a man, a Markovian, teleports in and kills them all, gaining full access to Freeland. At the police station, Henderson interrogates Jamila and threatens to jail her if she doesn't stop her reporting, but it's all a ruse. Henderson wants her to be the voice of the people and the resistance movements. Meanwhile, in the lab, we see Lynn collects the information that Tobias requested and continues to dose her with green light-based drugs, though she selectively removes the files of two of the kids. Brandon reveals to Jennifer that he's looking for Dr. Jace because Jace killed his mother, and he also shows off his powers by turning coal into a diamond, as his powers lets him manipulate the earth around him. While Gamby works on something to help Anissa, he realises the poison is very similar to painkillers. We then also see Lynn gives Tobias the file and he taunts her about Odell and slyly suggests that Odell kill Issa. Grace comes home and finds Anissa seizing and calls for help from Gamby. His antidote manages to work and then he leaves. Odell is alerted about the teleporter and confronts the Markovian. A gunfight breaks out with Odell gravely injured when Black Lightning then shows up. The Markovian flees and Agent Odell dies, calling Black Lightning pathetic for not killing. Interesting. Henderson introduces the resistance to Jamila and she does her first citywide broadcast. Meanwhile, back at the Markovian base, the teleporter gets paid for his work and mentions Black Lightning getting the attention of Dr. Jace. They want Lynn's stabilization work for their own purposes, and at the cemetery, Gamby discovers Khalil's grave is empty, and back at home, Lynn packs her bags, claiming that she and Jefferson are done, and that's pretty well how episode 6 ends. Excellent episode. Really enjoyed this a lot. I do wonder what kind of role Tobias will now play now that Agent Odell has been killed. It's going to be very interesting. We also see that Lynn's addiction to green light is getting worse, and it's really cool to see that the resistance against the ASA is now building up to take them down. So overall, very good episode. Really enjoyed it a lot, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it's going to play out in episode 7. So I am going to wrap this up now. What did you think of episode 6? Did you think it was good? How did you feel about Agent Odell being killed? What kind of role do you think Tobias is going to play now that he's fully restored back to normal? What about the ASA resistance? Do you think they have a chance to taking them down? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will be back next time for another edition of the Black Lightning Season 3 review series, where I'll be talking about episode 7, which I am very much looking forward to talking about. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe.